Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. As a 27-year-old producer on The Mike Douglas Show, Roger Ailes overheard Richard Nixon, waiting to go on the air, say it was a shame that a man had to resort to gimmicks like television to get elected. Mr. Ailes replied, "Television isn't a gimmick, and if you think so, you'll lose." A few days later, Richard Nixon hired Roger Ailes. Mr. Ailes worked on Richard Nixon's 1968 campaign, on Ronald Reagan's 1984 re-election campaign, and on George H.W. Bush's 1988 campaign. In 1996, Mr. Ailes joined the News Corporation to found a new cable television network, Fox News. Fox News passed CNN in the ratings in 2002 and has remained the dominant cable news channel ever since. Recently, on the ABC show This Week, Arianna Huffington referred to the famous essay by historian Richard Hofstadter entitled "The Paranoid Style in American Politics." And then she looked at you.
Yeah.
Your reply?
You ever read her website? I mean, you want to talk about paranoia? She's got her own gimmick going.
Okay.
I didn't tell her I enjoyed her on Green Acres, but I was tempted to.
All right. Segment one, how you did it. Well, I want to get to the launch of Fox News in a moment, but first, a series of earlier events. During the first half of the 1990s, the News Corporation hired a number of executives to head Fox News, including Van Gordon Sauter, a former president of CBS News. 20 years experience with CBS News, rising to president. None of those guys, including Van Gordon Sauter, succeeded in doing what you were about to do. How come?
Well, Van's a very talented guy, but he did grow up in the network system, and cable they don't have as many zeros at the end of the budget lines as network, and I think that was part of it. I think at different times, I'm a great admirer of Van Sauter's, and the other guys, I'm not sure what happened because I wasn't here at the time. I was president of CNBC for a couple of years. When I left politics in the very early 90s, after the '88 campaign, I decided that was the end of politics for me. And my mother always thought I couldn't find a job because I told her I was a consultant. But I finally found one, and I went to CNBC, and then I came over here, and Rupert asked me if I could build a news channel.
Can I ask you there, Roger? So another way of putting a similar question is, you at NBC, running their cable operation, CNBC, you didn't do what you would then do at News Corporation. There's the meeting of News Corporation with Roger Ailes seems to have been the mixture. What was going on?
Well, I think part of it is the meeting of Rupert Murdoch and Roger Ailes. Rupert Murdoch is a great entrepreneur, probably the greatest media entrepreneur in history, certainly a guy who has had tremendous success in his own life, and he prefers his executives to be sort of intrapreneurs. He gives you the time, he listens to the idea, he funds it, and as long as you can deliver it, he expects you to do your job. So it isn't quite the same way as it was working at NBC. When I worked at NBC, it's much more corporate. There were many more meetings. There were a lot of CYA meetings where everybody had to get their fingerprints on something, so if it failed, everybody was guilty. Here it's very clear. Rupert gives you the budget, gives you the time, and says, get it done. If you don't, then of course you fail. But I operate better in that kind of a climate, and I think that's the reason Rupert's had so many successes.
Okay. You launched Fox News in 1996. At the time, Fox News had access to 17 million homes, MSNBC to 22 million homes, CNN to 70 million homes. And yet, from that beginning, we go to the night of the special election in Massachusetts here in January, when Fox News attracted 6 million viewers, more than 3 times as many as CNN and MSNBC put together. That's the viewership. Here's the money from the New York Times, quote, "Fox News is believed to make more money than CNN, MSNBC, and the evening newscasts of NBC, ABC, and CBS combined," close quote. How did you do it?
I think that Fox News probably is more in touch with the American people. When I traveled around the country, I've probably worked in 35 different states. I've been in television stations in states. I produced the Mike Douglas Show back in the 60s, so I had a sense of audience. And in fact, we began in that show to use politicians' wives. We filmed in Hubert Humphrey's home. We had his wife Muriel on as a co-host. So I had a sense of what was going to happen in television, that there would be a mixture of entertainment, information, politics. It's all one now. And if they looked at Jack Paar, they wanted their politicians to be as comfortable as he was telling a story. And Jack Kennedy, of course, changed everything because he was so handsome and articulate. And so I think that the times changed. I was there. I saw what was going on, and I brought all of those to Fox News, including the ability just to talk in a conversational manner. In the old days, it used to be, I'm the anchorman, yes. I know the news, you don't, and please be quiet. Mm-hmm.
Ken Auletta, Fox News is opinionated and conservative, and its news is delivered by people who are often opinionated and conservative. And this is the big take on Fox News. You did it by recognizing that according to Gallup, 40% of Americans call themselves conservative. They were being underserved in television, and that's the opportunity Roger Ailes spotted. It's politics.
Well, with all of my respect for Ken Auletta, everybody's a conservative to Ken Auletta because he's a liberal. And of course, if you look at other networks and say, well, don't you have too many conservatives on? I say, yes, compared to none on the other channels, we look very much like that. But we have as many liberals as we have conservatives on the Fox News channel. What I recognized was the American people didn't want to be told what to think about the information they were receiving. So we came up with We Report, You Decide, fair and balanced. We've never told anybody what not to say. We've never not booked any liberal on the network that wants to be on. We just want a dialogue, and we believe the ideas and the issues will sort themselves out.
Segment 2, what makes Roger Ailes Roger Ailes? I quote you, I built this channel from my life experience. My first qualification is I didn't go to Columbia Journalism School. There are no parties in this town that I want to go to, close quote. And my reply to that is, why not? New York is full of people who come from little towns like Warren, Ohio, and take to the place and go to the parties. What is it in your life experience that has enabled you or compelled you to remain insistently an outsider?
Well, I started out digging ditches in Ohio and putting in sewer pipe, and I know those people very well. They don't get to go to these parties. They're happy to get to go to the Olive Garden on a Friday night and go home and watch a game. And frankly, that's more entertaining than going to the New York parties. I've been to some. I have to go to some for business purposes, but I never wanted to necessarily. It's just my personality. I understand what's going on out there. People are really hurting. I went back to my hometown. They were holding up signs, "Welcome home, Roger. Please come back. Bring jobs." I mean, these are people who are really suffering. They're people who are worried about the security of the United States. They're worried about being able to afford college for their kids. And so I work like I worked when I was 25 years old. I don't work any differently. And so I don't party any differently, probably.
So you have made a conscious effort to remain in touch with the heartland in a way that the folks who staff most newsrooms around here, you would argue, just haven't.
Well, I meet too many people who want to be seen in restaurants and get the right table and want people to think that they care. They wear ribbons for various charity events. I try to contribute to charity. I try to help people where I can, but I don't wear the pins. And so they assume that I don't care. Of course I care, but I don't think wearing the right pin makes me a caring person. I think whether I am or I'm not is in my heart.
Ken Auletta, quote, listen to this one. Roger Ailes needs enemies like a tank needs fuel. You've been successful, Roger, since you were in your 20s. I mean, producer of the Mike Douglas Show when it started out in Cleveland and it became a big national show, and all this is happening to you while you're still in your 20s. You got success early. and yet you remain, as everyone will say, one of the most pugnacious men in the business. How come? Why are you? Why the pugnacity?
Well, I would argue with that. I don't need enemies. I have plenty. I actually don't need any more. I've had my ups and downs in my life and in my career, but it's not whether you stay down, it's whether you get up. And I've had to get up several times, and I do. I don't look for fights.
But you don't mind them. You don't mind
well,
them.
I'm better at them than probably I should be, but I don't look for them.
Okay.
I really don't. I'm quite a happy guy and prefer to stay that way. But if somebody gets over the line or challenges in some incorrect way, I will respond because I don't worry about what they're going to write about me.
You grew up in a factory town, just on the demographics that would suggest Democrat background. You made your career in the media, again, just on the sort of demographic averages that would suggest that you'd be a liberal Democrat. The three presidents you helped get elected, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush. Where do your politics come from?
Many of my family were Democrats, I think, and we grew up in but they were World War II Democrats. They were very patriotic. They were very much in favor of the country. They might have been a little more pro-union or what have you. I never had a political thought, I don't think, until they asked me to join the Richard Nixon campaign. But I joined as a television producer. Now the New York Times likes to write that I was somehow a strategist
guy, right,
and in charge of the Southern strategy. I was hired to put the key light and the backlight in the right place and make sure the tape was rolling. And I was a good television producer, and everybody said, this guy will never get elected on television. And I thought, that's a media challenge, and I'm pretty good at media. Let me see what I can do here. And I didn't disagree with his policies. I mean, I thought that...
Well, can I just ask, sort of as a mental experiment, if in 1967 it had been Hubert Humphrey in the green room of the Mike Douglas show saying something about television, would you have just as readily gone to work for Hubert Humphrey as for Richard Nixon?
No, because I knew Hubert Humphrey, and I knew Lyndon Johnson's policies with regard to Vietnam. Remember...
So it was Vietnam.
Vietnam, my best friend was killed in that war. I was too old for it. I tried to fly. I couldn't get into the flying because of eyesight when I was in my early 20s. Then by the time I was 25, I was out of range of draft and so on. But I knew a lot of people who went, and I didn't think that escalating 400,000 more troops warranted in a jungle that I didn't know what we were going to win. It's a little bit like Afghanistan right now. Now I understand the nuclear issue, but there is a problem. When you send people into war, you have to tell them what they're trying to win.
Go in to win or don't go.
Yeah.
So your politics, with Richard Nixon, it was the silent majority, the heartland, the hardworking, the patriotic American. With Reagan, it was the Reagan Democrat. Again, hardworking, patriotic, tend to be in the heartland. Those are the people that you think of yourself as that kind of American. Is that right?
I am not, I see myself between the Hudson River and the Sierra Madres. I don't see myself at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel or Le Cirque here in New York. Those are people who aspire to different things. The chattering class, they want to talk about these things, and they think Ahmadinejad wants to have a chat with us and that we haven't been enough outreach. No, he wants to actually cut our heads off and blow us up with nuclear weapons. And he's made that clear. But there's something about those people who think, oh, he's just kidding. He doesn't want to kill us. No, he wants to kill us. And so I tend to be a realist about things.
Okay. Segment 3, number 7. The London Telegraph recently published its list of the 100 most influential conservatives in America. Roger Ailes came in at position 7. That's ahead of former President George W. Bush, ahead of Chief Justice John Roberts, and ahead of presidential candidates Governor Tim Pawlenty and former Governor Mitt Romney. On the other hand, I have to break it to you, you came in just behind Glenn Beck. So here you are, the director of a...
Glenn's actually not a conservative, and I would argue that in 40 years, nobody's ever asked my position on an issue. They have no idea what I believe about certain issues.
So you reject this outright?
I do, because I think you have to know, just like in a poll, you have to know how the question was asked. And so what's their definition of a conservative? I tend to be conservative. I grew up in Ohio during Taft time and so on, and the Eisenhower era. So I tend to be conservative on many issues, certainly on national security, and I would probably qualify, but I'm not anywhere near a radical.
Okay, let's talk about the effect, the Fox effect. And whose term am I using? I'm using the 44th President of the United States term. He called it the Fox effect. Barack Obama said that the Fox effect probably cost him a couple of points in the election. And Democratic political consultant James Carville said recently that, quote, if Roger Ailes were a Democrat, there would be 67 Democratic senators right now instead of 59.
68, but go ahead.
68?
I respect James, but when I used to do that for a living, I was pretty good at it.
Okay, so here you have the President of the United States and others, including the extremely intelligent James Carville, saying Fox News shapes the nation's politics.
Well, that's their fault.
Are you pleased? Are you appalled? Oh, go ahead.
No, that's their fault. I mean, what we do is we go on the air every day with 2 points of view in the news. Glenn Beck has a phone on his set that says, if I make any factual errors, please call me so I can correct them immediately and apologize. And the phone never rings because what he's saying is apparently true. We have been 13 years on the air. In our 14th year, we've never taken a story down because of factual problems.
Right. Paul Starr, journalist writing in the current issue of The Atlantic. This is a longish quote, but it gets at something interesting. I want to see how you respond. Quote, not since the 19th century have presidents had to deal with partisan media of this kind. Here he's referring to cable news. Today, the media saturate American life far more fully than they did early in American history. Now here we go. When Cronkite gives way to Beck, political leadership loses a consensus-building partner. This is the problem that faces Obama, close quote. Cable news fractures the media. The president can no longer command the attention of the entire nation. He's got this niche operation, that niche operation, and Fox News over here attacking. It's a new kind of problem that a president hasn't had to face before.
Well, Spiro Agnew didn't like the media either. And he went off on nattering nabobs of whatever.
Negativism.
Negativism. Right. And now we hear the president saying it's all the cable news fault. What about the other cable news channels that endorse everything and cheer? I mean, they get up and applaud. He stood up at the radio TV dinner and he said, I know you all voted for me, and they stood up cheering. Of course they did. Right. So, you know, if I once asked somebody, I went to one of those seldom that I go to parties, but somebody started on me about Fox News being conservative, and I said, are you comfortable with CNN and MSNBC? And he said, absolutely. And I said, what about NBC, ABC, and CBS? He said, fine. I said, PBS, NPR, no problem. I said, New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times. He said, great. I said, but this little cable channel called Fox is somehow ruining your life. I said, keep in mind, the last two guys to get all of them lined up together were Hitler and Stalin. That did not work out well for people. So if to be honest with you, if all the media tipped to the right, I'd be the biggest liberal in New York. I mean, I don't think the American people have got to understand that everything the government does costs money, and there are only two places to get it: their wallet or to print it. And if they print it, it reduces the amount of money in their wallet. That's it. And so they get a right to have a voice in those things. Politicians don't like that, because the way they get reelected is to spend money, spend the American people's money. And you're seeing some people begin to rebel.
So when you think of the way the press treated Richard Nixon, when you think of the way the press treated George W. Bush, do you subscribe to the statement of your news host, Chris Wallace, that the Obama administration is the biggest bunch, he said, the biggest bunch of crybabies that he's dealt with in his 30 years in Washington? They're whining over nothing.
Well, I don't think they're whining over nothing, and I think they have, look, there's legitimate complaints that they can have, and I've had this dialogue with David Axelrod, who I like very much, and There are legitimate areas. I mean, Chris said that. That's his words. That's what he believed, and he had reason to believe that.
Right.
But I don't think it's helpful to say that. I mean, Richard Nixon got himself into trouble, and he got a lot of press because he went to war with the press, which is never helpful. George W. Bush probably could have been more articulate about some of the things he was doing, although in retrospect, the main successes in the Obama administration is where he's copying what George W. Bush did. I mean, he's having problems everywhere else.
Right.
And I'm not taking sides here on either one. I would love for Barack Obama to understand that Americans are worried. They're worried about their national security. They're worried about government spending. Yeah, they're worried about health care. But let me give you an example. And I tried to say this. The 300,000 people roughly, not quite that, 270, 280, who have health care they like. There are
300 million.
300 million.
Right.
There are 30 million who don't. So if you're an executive, where do you go to solve that problem? Do you go upset the 300 million who are happy? Or do you go over here and try to fix, maybe get a public-private partnership between insurance and the government to take care of the 30 who need it? We didn't do that because the health care plan was a voter registration plan. As long as you can get 300 million people getting a check from the government, they're going to vote a certain way.
Right.
One-party government doesn't work. It worked in Chicago, but it doesn't work for the country. Every time you have a poverty city, you have one-party government. That's Chicago, true. Newark,
Baltimore,
Cleveland, Baltimore. You can't have one party, and it doesn't matter which party. I mean, Republicans sometimes steal big things like Enron and things like that, but they tend not to steal cities. Corruption and leadership are the two biggest problems in America today. The corruption is a problem, and the fact that people just won't step up and lead is another problem.
Segment 4, the medium itself. Talk radio. Rush, Sean Hannity, Hugh Hewitt, Laura Ingraham, Michael Medved, on and on. Air America, the left-wing attempt to launch a talk radio station, belly up, gone. Cable TV. There's Fox News, and then there's everybody else. But print journalism, broadcast television, politically you get a completely different complexion. Why is it that conservative or free market or simply pugnacious journalism tends to thrive in talk radio and cable news operations, but these other media seem to be dominated by liberals? Is there something about the media themselves? What's going on there?
What are the two that are dying out? Broadcast and print journalism. And cable and talk radio are still going up. That's because people respond to them. People have a right, if you're going to do Air America and present all liberal views, that's fine. But those people aren't funny. They aren't funny. They're worried about the snail darters and the bark on the tree and the ozone, and then they go crazy because it's hard to sell some of those points of view. It's hard to sell that you want to have a chat with Ahmadinejad. It's hard to sell that a $12 trillion deficit's a great idea. It's hard to sell that. So they attack conservatives and say these are mean, horrible people because they don't want to spend their money. I think that's what the problem is. They're not very entertaining. If I produced Air America, I'd make it entertaining.
They're just bad journalism. They're just bad journalism.
No, they're okay. I mean, and there are great journalists in broadcast. I mean, Brokaw and these guys, they were great journalists.
Good professionals.
They were good professionals. And but the journalism schools today are wildly to the left. And so they say we're wildly to the right. It's just not true. They can come on and say that on our air. You see?
Roger, Fox News has defeated CNN in the ratings every year for something like 8 years now. Now, I can understand it if Pepsi has trouble catching up with Coke because there's a secret formula. But what you do is right there. You turn on the dial and it's on. Hours and hours and hours of Fox News. Why is it that there is that CNN and MSNBC are culturally or organizationally incapable of doing what they need to do to catch up?
Believe it or not, I knew Colonel Sanders. When I was I worked at WTAP in Parkersburg, West Virginia when I was in college. And I used to stop at Colonel Sanders' original restaurant.
Really?
down in Marietta, I think, Ohio, right before the bridge. And I'd drive down there at night. So Fox News has a secret formula, and we're never going to tell anybody what it is. So that's it. I learned a lot from Colonel Sanders.
No, but why can't they? What is it that it's in their head somehow that CNN won't stoop to do what Fox does?
Well, we got to look down to find them. I mean, the idea of stooping to our level is just ridiculous. I mean, they do everything we do in terms of tabloid journalism, only worse. Okay, but it's not that. It's there are several factors. Somebody asked me how I pick talent, so I sat down and wrote a list because I'm going to do a book one of these days.
Okay.
And I had 26 items of how I picked talent. I quickly said, how do I do it? And there were 26 items. The first one was, do I hate their agent? Because if I hate their agent, they're never even going to get an interview. So, you know, I mean, there are ways you do these things.
Fox anchor Neil Cavuto once asked GE chairman Jeff Immelt how he planned to improve GE's cable news operation, MSNBC. They may sell it soon, but they still own it for now. Immelt's reply, quote, "I think the standard right now is Fox. I want to be as interesting and edgy as you guys are," close quote. MSNBC seems to be trying to be a niche player on the left. Are they doing a good job? Are they misreading you as saying, oh, you've got the niche on the right, we'll try to take the left?
Well,
what's going on there?
Well, I'm not going to help them. I mean, you know, I think that every one of these networks has talented people, and many of them are friends of mine, believe it or not. And I don't want to disparage what they do. I think that if you understand America, people say, well, it's a center-right nation, and there's some truth to that. I mean, in the end, there are simple things that the American people believe in. It's the reason John Wayne is still the top one in the top 5 movie stars of all time. He's been dead for 40 years. But you always knew about him. Don't touch my woman, don't steal my horse, and don't ever draw a gun on me. Otherwise, we're going to get along fine. Americans are simple, but not simpletons. They're very smart. They love their family. They love their flag. They think schools have gone off the edge and killed American history, and they have. And they think they ought to get to keep some of their own money. I mean, it's pretty simple stuff.
Pretty simple stuff. Last segment. Roger Ailes, the pro. In a sentence or two, would you please critique each of the following as a communicator, particularly as a communicator on television? Richard Nixon.
He was hard work. I mean, it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't his medium.
Did you ever develop an affection for him?
Yes, I thought he was very smart. I thought he was socially awkward. People who heard the Nixon-Kennedy debate believed he won it on radio, on
right.
voice and substance. But Jack proved that life was changing, and they had to look at you and see you. And he was magnificent in those debates. So, you know, I think it wasn't his medium. The times had changed, and he hadn't. So.
Ronald Reagan.
Reagan was a natural because he did not feel uncomfortable around cameras, directors, people, noise on the set. He'd been through it all.
Well, you say he was a natural. To what extent was it a kind of God-given innate gift, and to what extent was it that Reagan had been through decades in Hollywood and radio and just was professional? He
was a serious professional. I mean, he knew, but he would say, you know, where are my marks? I mean, you never hear a candidate walk in and say, where are my marks? Where's my key light? Okay, what's the backlight? Have you got, I mean, he could do that, and he knew it. He worked best with speechwriters, but he would also write a lot of his own material, as you know. He had his own thoughts about it. He was comfortable, and that's the most important thing. He was comfortable and likable.
George W. Bush.
You know, I haven't studied. I've been so busy working in news. I was running Fox News. I saw what everybody said. I asked our research center to get me some good press on him, and they called me back in about an hour and said, we can't find any. I said, this guy's been president for 7 years. You can't find anything good about him? They said, not really. I mean, he was at a bridge opening or something, and he was but I thought, wow, you know.
So what, here you have an honorable, hardworking man whose politics fundamentally conform with the politics that you've just been describing in the middle of the country, and he leaves office with an approval rating in the 30s.
Well, if you get pounded for that many years, now he did get good press right after 9/11, but so did everybody. Now we're too worried about the terrorist feelings. We won't even call them terrorists. We call them unhappy people who are trying to hurt us. I mean, that's just stupid. But
could he have done better? So he had
yeah,
the war.
Look, he was not a natural communicator.
Did he let the medium get away from him? Should he have stayed on? Could he have stayed on top of the press?
No.
He could not.
No.
He could not.
No, not in my view.
All right. Barack Obama. Chris Matthews famously said after listening to an Obama speech, quote, "I felt a thrill going up my leg," close quote. Do you buy the Obama as magnificent orator?
The first time I saw him was a few years before he ran on a stage, and I said, that guy is really good. Now, he was doing teleprompter speeches, but he was really good. And he's obviously very smart, comfortable with language, comfortable with audiences, and so on. That is a big step. He's much more of a natural communicator. He's now so overexposed, and except in press conferences or anything where he might have to actually answer a question, that it's taken the edge off. I mean, you don't want to see too many Ginger Roger movies. I mean,
let me put you in this position. You advised Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush in their camp. Let's just do the mental experiment. You're now David Axelrod.
And by the way, I didn't agree with their politics always. I mean, I don't feel it's my job.
From the point of view of a television professional, what advice do you give Barack Obama right now? One is you're overexposed.
He's overexposed. He's underexposed and overexposed. He said he's going to be transparent. He isn't. So that's underexposure. But he's on television every time I look at the television set. So he's kind of overexposed, but he's not letting us in on any of the inner workings of what he's trying to accomplish. He's got...
And the press and people respond to that. You can't pull that off.
No, they have an investment in him now because they jumped so far in the tank during the election they can't get out. But he's smart, and if you go to the American people sincerely and say, look, I really believe a $12 trillion deficit's a good idea. I mean, you have to sell it, but it's going to be a hard sell. He has to sell his ideas. Richard Neustadt, in Presidential Power, 50, 60 years ago, wrote that the real power of the presidency is the power of persuasion.
Right.
He said, I didn't sell my health care plan well enough. Well, he had 127 appearances to sell it. So either he needs to look at his speechwriters or exactly what he's saying about it. The bottom line is, if you think you can trick the American people, the old line, I mean, you can fool some of them some of the time, but you're not going to fool all of them very long.
So the notion that his oratorical gifts and his presence on television are so overwhelming that he can sell something that's unpopular to the public, that will not fly.
I don't think it will, but I think that he has the chance. He has more problems probably than any president. I mean, Bush had a problem. We were attacked, 3,000 people killed.
Right.
That was a tough problem. Every president has some tough problems. Some coast, some don't. But most of the times, it's how you face those times you live in, how you pass through those times. I think Barack Obama has still the opportunity to be a great president. But he has to decide, he has to lead the American people. He can't tell them what to do, and he can't do it in a back room because they're going to catch on.
Okay. Last question. Roger, you have a home that you love, a family you cherish, and more money than your father, the electrical worker back in Warren, Ohio, could ever have dreamed of. Why don't you take up rose gardening? What keeps you coming in and putting in these long days?
Because there are too many people who want me to retire. and if it were only me, I'd probably do it. But I believe we're in the most difficult tipping point probably decade of our history. And
You do?
Oh, absolutely. And we have to go back to understanding that we are Americans. That people, you know, multiculturalism, diversity, all those things are very good. But they don't trump the one word that should be taught in schools, unity. People came to this country from different countries and backgrounds and races to be Americans. So we're American African, we're American Jewish, we're American Irish, we're American something, but we're Americans. And we have got to go back to that culture, and we've got to teach it in our schools, and we've got to understand it, because we're making a difference in the world. The world looks to us to be strong. They look to us to be financially strong and militarily strong, because in the end we're fair. And ultimately, we're the only guys who show up when there's trouble. Look at Haiti. That should have been a UN problem.
And you can't walk away from the
I
mix of it.
I can't walk away until I think that enough people understand how valuable and how important being an American is. That's a responsibility.
Roger Ailes, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Fox News, thank you. I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge. Thanks for joining us.